Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and a very good day. Welcome to the SHAPE discussion series on establishing Islamic finance in the US. This topic is actually close to our heart because SHAPE's first establishment was actually in the US. I'm Shabna Mokhtar. I'll be the moderator today, and our speaker today is actually our group CEO, Mr. Abdulkader Thomas. Mr. Abdulkader, why are we talking about Islamic finance in the US?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Well, I think there's a number of interesting elements to it. The first one is that people often think that it's a market with nothing happening, and actually it's a surprisingly vibrant market. And the second is that US legal foundations like English law foundations generally create opportunities for international transactions on a widespread basis. So there's a couple of things
about yourself and your attachment to the States.
Well, of course, I'm an American, and I've been involved with different aspects of Islamic finance in the US since 1987, when I returned to the US after having worked in Bahrain. So I've been involved with securities, real estate, banking aspects of the US Islamic finance scene since that time. And even now, despite the fact that I spent the last 15 years based out of Kuwait, SHAPE and myself continue to have attachments to the US and Canada through customers and projects.
All right. So what's the plan for our course?
Well, we're going to go through and look at a number of different points. We're going to start out looking at the early expansion of the market. Then we're going to talk about cross-border transactions, because these were the first significantly voluminous transactions going into the US. Then we'll talk about how home finance became important. And we'll look at the banking market, and then we'll discuss the capital markets, including the debt capital markets. And then we'll look at what happens when things go to court. And finally, we'll talk about where the market could be headed and what are some of the important factors to think about.
So why are we talking about the US market in this order? Is there any particular reason?
Well, this is somewhat chronological. So the first real activity came from cross-border transactions, somewhat simultaneously home finance, then banking, then capital markets. There is some overlap between all of them, but in terms of volume and generation of activity, this is really kind of the chronological pathway.
Right. So what do we aim to achieve at the end of the discussion?
I think we'd like to understand that the US market is actually an important part of the global Islamic finance market. The foundations are actually quite strong, and that we have about 40 years of legal work, market research, pilot projects, and successful businesses that have all created a market with tens of billions of dollars of value.
Would the experience in the US market be relevant for other markets trying to establish Islamic finance?
Well, we've seen in our own work that it's given some help in the Canadian market. There's been back and forth between the two countries, and it often is helpful in any other Anglo-Saxon legal environment. So something that has elements of English or different parts of American regulatory frameworks in them. Those will be countries that will benefit from the examples in the US. And then the other aspect is that we find many people are enthusiastic to say, oh, if country X would have an Islamic banking law, or have an Islamic capital markets law. And yet, when you look at the US, there's never going to be, in my opinion, an Islamic banking law or an Islamic capital markets law. But with the right approach to regulatory authorities and understanding how the common law works in different parts of the US, one can actually formulate all that one needs to operate a bank, a capital markets activity, whether it's a fund, it's a Sukuk project or whatever. So those parallels become valuable in other environments where, again, the secular nature of the government was not going to allow a uniquely Islamic finance law or regulation.
Interesting. So what you're saying is even without an explicit Islamic banking law or capital markets law, you can still do Islamic finance in the States.
Correct.